City, which is mental.
Yeah, I've just realised that we weren't actually broadcasting there.
Oh, great.
We had pressed the button for to go live, but for some reason it didn't work. But we are now live, so good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You missed an absolutely brilliant bit of chat there, so I have to apologise for that. A slight technical hitch. But we were just discussing, obviously, the game between Celtic and Young Boys of Bern this evening, which, of course, ended in a 1-0 win for Celtic on a very fortunate own goal. Both Mikey, who's here with me tonight, and Graham both agree that Celtic definitely dominated the first half, as I'm sure anybody watching the game would say was true. But let's have a little talk about the goals. 3 goals for Kyogo. All 3 of them disallowed correctly when you look back on them. But I felt on first viewing of each of the goals, they all looked perfectly good goals. But as Graham had said before, we managed to get ourselves on air there, that the VAR had got it right, every time when they disallowed the goals. How did you see it, Mikey? Did you think initially they were clean goals?
I think just naturally when you're watching the game and you see a goal that on first glance you can't see anything that's sort of glaringly obvious to disallow it for, I think you kind of automatically think, yeah, the goal's going to stand. But I think just for Kyogo this season in general, like, he's had a very weird season where it does seem like he's one of the players that has the potential to get really unlucky on nights like this. He's not, like, obviously he scored a lot of goals in Scotland, like in the Premiership, but I think just in general, he's had quite a few sort of unlucky games. But on first viewing, I didn't think any of them would be disallowed. But as Graham said, I think that looking back at them, I think it's pretty, I guess, comprehensive that they all should have been disallowed in the end.
Graham, there we go. My mic was off there, Graham.
It's all right. Yeah, I mean, I think on first viewing, you kind of think, oh, these are quite tight. But when you see it again, they are definitely the right decisions. I think the one that a lot of folk were talking about was the one that Callum McGregor, the foul. And again, as Joe Hart had said at the time, he didn't think it was a foul, but when you see it back, it's a clear foul. Of course, the Celtic fans, the Celtic power wouldn't have seen that, but it was a definite foul from McGregor. So, as I said, this is what VAR's there for, to see these decisions and get them right, and they did get them right. But it was very frustrating for Celtic. And that's what I'm kind of thinking, that at some point you're thinking, this ain't going to be Celtic's night. I think I'd listened to the radio at half-time, and they were trying to find a stat to show the last time that one player had 3 goals ruled out, and they couldn't find one. So it was obviously disappointing for Kyogo, but they were all correct. He needs to time his runs better. We know what Kyogo's like. He plays in the shoulder. He plays in the last man. We know what he's like. He just needed to time his run a little bit better, because there was so much space behind that Young Boys defence so often in that first half. They kept getting him behind so many times, and you did kind of feel that at some point they would get it right. They didn't, but then they eventually got the goal in the second half.
Yeah, I think it's the fact that both Daisen Maeda and Kyogo are so fast across the ground that they get caught out. Not just tonight, but in a lot of other games, they get caught out because they're so quick. But I think we complain a lot about VAR, in football, and sometimes I think it's quite justified, the complaints that we make about it. But when you see it working the way it worked tonight, then I think you have to, give them credit for it. The only thing I think they got wrong tonight, although I think it was a sending off personally, was the red card for Maeda after the VAR review. How did you see it, Graham?
Yeah, again, I thought when you watch it at first view and you're thinking maybe that's harsh, but to see it again, it does kick out. It is rash. I mean, I suppose the good thing for Celtic is that the last couple of minutes it didn't really make too much of a difference, and he's going to miss the Aston Villa game, but that's not going to matter. But it was, looking at it again, it is a red card. I know that Joe Hart didn't agree at the time, but it was definitely a red card. You kind of kick out like that. So yeah, I think they did. I think they did get that right.
Mikey,
I think it's a red card, because I think when you do something that blatant with VAR watching and with the whole sort of, I guess, just the rules around football now, you're not going to get away with that. But I will say that is it Kamara? I think he kicked out at. I think he did it literally 2 seconds earlier to Maeda, so I think it kind of goes both ways. So I mean, I think if you're going to give Maeda the red card, there you kind of have to give the same to Kamara, but it is inconsistency. It's the one that I thought was very dodgy, but I don't think there's much debate around the Maeda red card. I just think that if Maeda's getting sent off for that, then Kamara needs to go as well, because he's done the exact same thing.
Yeah, I had a comment exactly the same as that on a chat group that I was on during the game with somebody who isn't a Celtic supporter, but they made the exact same point that you did, Mikey. When you see what they're showing the referee on VAR on the television, they don't show what happened prior to Maeda's kick out, which was wrong. But I think if they had shown the whole incident, I think they would have, because I think Kamara had been booked earlier as well, so I think he would have been off too. But you can't kick out, and he's a seasoned professional, Maeda, so he knows that, and I'm sure he'd be full of apologies, in that dressing room. I'm hoping they would have had a translator in there so that he could apologise to his teammates. But over the course of the game, for me personally, as I said at the top of the show, it was very much a game of two halves. And I felt personally, individually, in the second half, there was lots of silly little mistakes were getting made by players who, in the first half, were very quick, very clean. And I felt personally that Callum McGregor seemed to lose his legs a little bit. Now, I know you're not likely to take off your captain unless something's happened to him, and he's got injured or whatever. But for me personally, I just felt that it might have been an idea to take him out and bring on Luke McCown. What do you think, Graham?
Yeah, I think the second half, it was kind of frustration from Celtic players that things just weren't quite happening. I said they had total control in the first half. Second half was different. There was a lot of gaps appearing for young boys. And I think there was a few Celtic players making really stray passes, making a few mistakes. And I think it was a nervousness because of how much it meant to try and win that game. I think it was a nervousness. You could sense it around Celtic Park as well, that they weren't getting that goal. There was a real sense of frustration. And I think McGregor definitely, there was a few loose passes there. And it's funny because before the game, I listened to a football phone-in show, and the number of Celtic fans that had phoned in before the game to say they didn't want Hatate to start, they wanted McCowan to start. And it actually turned out Hatate was probably Celtic's best player, I thought, tonight. But I'm a big fan of Luke McCowan. I think he's a cracking footballer. I've always rated him. But yeah, there was definitely mistakes in that team in the second half. But I think generally it was nerves. The fact they hadn't got that goal, the fact they were looking like they were going to, throw away a chance to get to the playoff. I think it was just frustration and nerves, I think. Yeah,
what about you, Mikey? Do you think it was frustration and nerves?
I think so, but I think as well the crowd getting on their back at times when obviously there was like the stray passes and when things weren't really going in their favour. I think that really did sort of, I guess, lead to more Celtic mistakes because they were kind of trying to overplay it at times. But I will say that I think that a lot of it was nerves for Celtic because they'd scored 3 goals in the first half that were disallowed. They'd missed a penalty, and it was just seeming like their chance to get through was kind of slipping away. So I think they were kind of almost just trying to rush things and try and make things happen. And yeah, I think that the crowd getting on their back, and there was quite a few things that were kind of, I guess, coming together for Celtic, which would maybe sort of point towards it being one of those nights for them. But overall, I mean, they got the result in the end, so it doesn't really matter now. But I will say, I think with McCowan, it was definitely would have been a good option. And I think, yeah, especially McGregor, who was having quite a poor sort of time in that second half, I think that bringing a more attacking-minded player like Luke McCowan on would have probably helped them at least somewhat.
Yeah. The other interesting, but not really, I suppose, interesting substitution, but the kind of normal substitution was when Alex Valle came on to replace Taylor, who I thought did really well in the first half, but I thought in the second half, again, he kind of looked as if he was out of the game a little bit. And I suppose that's probably why partly he got replaced. How do you guys feel about Taylor in terms of being a Champions League player?
I think he's a very high-level player. I think he's very underrated, I think, especially among Celtic fans who seem to, at the moment, be quite quick to try and look for a replacement with the likes of Kieran Tierney. But I think if you look at what he's done for Celtic, not only domestically, but he's done stuff in the Champions League. He's had very good performances there. I think sometimes he goes under the radar a lot, and it's a shame to see, because I feel like sometimes players at the likes of Celtic and Rangers, they don't get fully appreciated. And I think that, tonight he didn't have a great game, but I do think that obviously bringing Alex Valle on tonight was probably the best option. But I think if you're taking everything into account, I think Greg Taylor's done an absolutely brilliant job at Celtic, and I think that he's still a very crucial player for them. So I can see the Brendan Rodgers frustration with this whole sort of stuff around him. But at the end of the day, it's not going to be the fans' choice to decide who plays left back for them. It's the manager. And if he's picking Greg Taylor, then he knows best. So I think you just need to trust in what the manager's doing is the main sort of point I'd make.
Yeah. Graham?
I think Taylor's a consummate professional, and the fact that he basically starts nearly every week says everything for me. You know, if you're starting with a Champions League game, then you trust him. And Greg Taylor very rarely lets Celtic down. I know people will say, he's good in the league because he's not putting his real any quality, but when he does play in the Champions League, he's a really solid defender. And I thought he actually played quite well tonight, especially first half. He was doing really well, especially getting forward as well. I think second half, he did tire. That's going to happen. But I genuinely think Greg Taylor gets a lot of unwarranted stick. I think he's a really, really good defender. Now, obviously, they've got Kieran Tierney will be coming in very shortly. Now, I think Tierney's a really good player. But I genuinely think Greg Taylor is a really good professional, and I think the stick that he gets is unwarranted at times, I think.
I mean, I'll be honest, I'm not particularly his greatest fan. And I wasn't even before he joined Celtic Football Club. For the simple reasons that I personally don't think he's of a high enough standard for playing in the Champions League or at an international level. But what I will say is there have been games both in the Champions League and at international level where he has kind of like gone above and beyond the call and had a really, really good game, which, as Graham says, is a mark of a consummate professional. Plus the fact that, as Mikey said, he gets a lot of stick from Celtic supporters, but he still puts himself out there on the line, you know, and he throws himself into tackles and stuff like that. Yes, he might make the odd mad mistake, but then what player doesn't, you know?
Yeah,
I think
agree.
Sorry, Mickey, I was going to say, Taylor, he never hides. You know, you just talk about the fact that Celtic fans get on his back. His head never goes down. He never drops his standards. You see a lot of players that they get booed by the crowd, or they're maybe not their fans' favourite. They kind of go into their shell a little bit. I don't think I've ever seen Taylor do that. He's just, like I said, the consummate professional. He never hides, and he gives his all.
Yeah, absolutely. You can't say he gives 100%. For me, I think he gives 110%, even in the games when he's perhaps not been as good as he might have been. As you said, Graham, he goes for it, he gives it, he puts it on the line for the team. And as I said, I'm not his greatest fan, and I'm not, afraid to say that. But I would give him credit, where it's due if he's had a good game. Likewise, if he's done something really terrible, I'm quite happy to own up to that as well. But I just found this quite interesting. Another wee chat platform that I'm on. I didn't realise this, but somebody just posted in there, 11 million euro, thank you. So I'm assuming that's what Celtic get for going through to the next round. But I would have thought that you wouldn't have known that until after the games next week. Would I be wrong in that assumption?
I'm not too sure. I don't really know how the finances work in the Champions League. I think that, obviously, if it's sort of been, I guess, talked about, then I suppose that's kind of what I'd go off. But it will be a huge financial benefit if they do. So, I think it will anyway. But depending on how far they get, it'll obviously get better every time. But with the finances the Celtic have already, I think they, with an extra however much it is, 10 million, 15 million, I think that can really invest in some really good players. Just look at some of their more recent signings, which have gone above and beyond what you'd expect from a Scottish team to sign players.
Well, if you think that it was £11 million that they spent on Arnie Engels, who in my opinion, is a super player. You know, he's taken a bit of time to bed in to the Celtic team, and I think you might not see the best of him until next season. But he has had big moments in games, done more so than missing the penalty tonight. But actually, I would have one argument with the commentator on the television show during the game who said that he had a 100% record in penalties. Now, I would disagree with that because the first time the penalty was taken against Ross County, it was saved. Admittedly, the goalkeeper was off the line, so it was retaken and he scored on the retake. But for me, that first one is still a missed penalty. Would you say so, guys? Do you think it was missed? Or would you count it?
Yeah, I think it was missed. I don't think there's really much debate about that. I mean, technically on paper it wasn't, but he has missed a penalty for Celtic, so yeah, I think it obviously is a missed penalty, yeah.
I know you'll have a completely opposite viewpoint, Graham. You know, you're not Celtic's greatest fan.
No, I generally think it's a missed penalty, personally. I think your first penalty, if you miss it, then you've missed it. So, yeah, I don't count the retakes. I think it's a miss, personally.
Right, so that's good to know that you're all in agreement with me that the TV commentator got it wrong by saying it was 100%. But let me ask you guys, who do you feel was your player of the match then?
It's a tough one because I think there was a few very good players, but for the way Kasper Schmeichel, I guess, kept Celtic in the game at times, I'd probably go with him.
Graham?
Rio Hatate, for me, I thought he was really, really good, and it's his pass for Ida that leads to the goal. Even though it's an own goal, I thought Hatate was really good tonight.
Yeah, I would have gone for Rio Hatate myself, but I have to agree with Mikey that he would have been an absolutely super candidate to get it as well, Schmeichel, you know, just for the saves that he made. Let's talk about the own goal then. If the young boys player hadn't been in the position he was in, do you think there was a Celtic player anywhere close enough who could have followed up and maybe got the ball in the rebound?
No.
Graham?
No, not that I saw.
No, not that I could see either. But interestingly enough, as I said, I'm on a couple of different chat groups during the game, it was a point that somebody made, you know, that they thought that Celtic would have still scored, you know, if the young boys player hadn't put it in the net. And interestingly enough, it was the young boys captain who scored, which I didn't realise at the time that he scored the goal. It was only afterwards when the commentator mentioned it. But I want to talk about the young boys goalkeeper, 22 years old. And I thought he had an absolutely super game. He made some wonderful saves, and for a big part, he probably kept young boys in that match. Mikey?
Yeah, I think he obviously did have a very good performance. Obviously, he did let 3 goals past him technically in the first half, but they were all obviously disallowed. And second half, I think he was brilliant. Even for the goal, I think he did a very good job. He did the best he could with the sort of chance it was. He saved a 1-on-1, and it was very unlucky that it kind of came off his own man in the end. But I think that his performance, especially for the ages, he's clearly probably put himself in the shop window now, I'd say. But I think the way that he played tonight in front of such a sort of hostile atmosphere when you're going away to a team like Celtic, I think he did a very, very good job. And obviously the penalty save as well. I think he did really keep them in that game at times. And I think he outside of those chances as well, I think he made some very, very crucial saves throughout the entire game as well.
Graham?
Yeah, I mean, for a team and a keeper that's lost 22 goals in the Champions League, he'll be gutted that the goal he's lost tonight is an own goal. But I thought he was excellent. There was a couple of saves I thought he kind of could have maybe held rather than kind of punch, but maybe that's just the way it is. But he did make some very big saves. And it's unfortunate of him that the goal they lose is an own goal. But yeah, I thought second half he made some really, really big saves. He's obviously a really good goalkeeper. He's still quite young as well. But yeah, he'll be gutted to be walking out of Celtic Park having not kept a clean sheet, because he was very impressive. But
Yeah.
I do feel sorry for him to lose the old goal like that, because he didn't deserve it.
Yeah, we've got a first comment in from YouTube there, from ConzoCast. Hello, not about the game, but Callum Morrison has been transfer listed by Falkirk by his own request. Who do you think you'll go to? Don't think he'll rule out abroad, but I think a Premiership club. Now, I have to put my hands up and I'll say straight away, I've got no idea who Callum Morrison is, right? Because I don't really pay that much attention to football in Scotland outside of the SPL. What about you, Graham? Do you know who he is, and have you got an opinion on that?
Yeah, because Callum Morrison used to play for Hearts quite a few years ago, so I know exactly who he is. He's a really good player. He's done very well at Falkirk, probably one of Falkirk's better players. He's a really good winger. He's a kind of winger I like, a bit like Nicholas Kuhn. I'm not putting them in the same bracket here, but I like the fact that wingers that actually get the ball and take their man on. Callum Morrison does that. I've already heard a few folks say he should come back to Hearts. Not for me. I can see him going to maybe the likes of a Kilmarnock or a St Johnstone or something like that. I mean, Collins might be right, maybe abroad, but I can maybe see him going to a team like St Johnstone or Kilmarnock personally.
Mikey?
I'd picture him more going to a team abroad. Not really an idea why. I just think I could visualise that. But if he was to move to a team in Scotland, I think it'd be St Mirren. With the current sort of attacking options St Mirren have are quite limited. They're not playing very well on the sort of offensive end, and I think bringing a player in like Callum Morrison for a team like St Mirren would really, really benefit them. And to be honest, I'd take him at Hibs as well. I think he is at that level where he'd be able to be a very good performer for a good side in the Premiership like Hibs. But yeah, I think he'd be more likely to go to the likes of St Mirren. But there's something just in my mind that tells me he's going to go to America. I'm not too sure why, but I think that's the sort of destination that I can just see him going to.
Well, that seems to be the kind of place. Sorry, what was that, Graham? Graham?
He's
still only 25, so he's still quite young. So he's still got a long way in the future, a long way in the game to go. So if he was to go abroad, even for a couple of years, might not be a bad move.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think kind of like America, the MLS seems to be the place, where a lot of players are going. I did see the other day that Wilfried Zaha has gone out there on loan for the remainder of the MLS season, which I know has got nothing to do with the Celtic in Europe tonight, but I just thought that was interesting after Mikey's comment about, Callum Morrison. But let's get back to the game tonight then. I was going to ask the question, who do you think would be the happier of the two managers? But I think we already know that that's going to be Brendan Rodgers overall. But do you think there might have been an element of frustration for Brendan, especially that second half?
I think he'll be looking into it because they obviously weren't good enough in that second half. But I think if he takes it all into account, and from what we've said as well, I think on another night Celtic win that game 3 or 4-0 quite comfortably. So I don't think he'll be fuming, obviously, because they won the game. But I think there will be things that he'll want to improve. I think, as we kind of said earlier, that the pace that a Kyogo has or a Dyson Maeda has, they don't need to be caught offside. They can time their run much better. They can try and get there. They can be a couple of yards behind where they are. They don't need to play on the shoulder when they have the pace that they do. So I think there is a few frustrations there to kind of try and iron out. But the main thing is they've got the win. They've got themselves potentially into the sort of later stages of the Champions League now. So I don't think he'll be majorly frustrated, but I think there's a few things that he'll need to try and iron out because, I think players like Kyogo don't need to be playing on the shoulder as much as they do, considering the pace that he has and considering the opportunities that he's kind of, I guess, given up this season by playing a bit too far on the shoulder, not giving himself the extra couple of yards that he can easily make up anyway.
Graham, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, he'll be delighted to win, absolutely. But I think he'll be disappointed he didn't wrap the game up earlier because I think they made it more nervous than they really had to be. Like as what I said earlier, they should have had the game wrapped up long before they did. But it's a massive 3 points. I think that's the first time Celtic will qualify for the knockout stages of the Champions League, which is a big, big thing as well. And obviously, you mentioned the money earlier on as well. That's another massive, massive thing. So he'll be delighted with that. But yeah, there will be a frustration. They've not taken more chances in that game. But the big thing was just win the game. I mean, I'm sure if you offered him before the game a 1-0 win, he'd have taken it. But it's just a big, big victory for them.
Yeah. Another message there from Konzacast. Also heard Alex Valle is in talks with Como. I think he's been a good player for Celtic and is good on the ball and getting them up the park. But with Tierney coming in, they don't mind too much. Yes, there has been a certain amount of talk about that. I have seen Alex Valle himself commenting that he's very happy at Celtic at the moment and would be quite happy to stay there. However, personally, I think if Kieran Tierney did come in January, as opposed to, after the summer where he's a free agent, then I think you would see Valle heading off to Como. Now, originally I thought it was an actual transfer, but it's just another loan. Do you think he should stay in Scotland or should he go to Italy?
I don't see why. I think if Kieran Tierney comes in, I think that's basically saying that Greg Taylor will leave, and I think they need two left backs. So I don't see why they get rid of Alex Valle, even on a sort of shorter basis. I think that they should try and keep Valle because I think he's been very solid. And if you're getting rid of Greg Taylor, I don't think there's many backup options that will be better than Alex Valle that they can realistically sort of have at the moment, because they'll have to go and buy a new fullback who I don't think is going to do a hugely better job than Alex Valle. Now in Scotland, I don't think he's been incredible in the top flight. I don't think he's kind of shown as much as he has on the European level. But I think when you've seen him in Europe this season, he's been very good. And I think that with the way that he's been playing, I think Celtic should try and keep a hold of him. But I think it's either Taylor or Valle will leave. And if there's one of the two that's more realistic, I think it would be Taylor, because I don't think Greg Taylor will be happy to settle for the backup option at fullback. I think that he'd want to be a starter somewhere, and I think he'd get starts at a lot of different clubs. So I think Alex Valle is the more realistic option to try and keep. But you never know, because Celtic can just go and spend $5 million on another backup fullback. So you never really know. But if I was in the Celtic sort of negotiation room, I'd try and keep Alex Valle to the best of my ability.
Graham?
I think it's a really tough one, because we talked about Greg Taylor earlier. Tonight was a big, big game, and he played Taylor over Valle, which says to me that Greg Taylor's still wanted by Celtic. So even if Kieran Tierney does come in, which it does look likely, I don't necessarily think that means that Taylor's away. I think there's every chance that Alex Valle might be the one that leaves. I might be wrong, but that's just the feeling that I get. The fact that I keep on saying that the fact that Greg Taylor's playing every week, he's keeping Valle out the team. So for me, I just don't think that if Tierney comes in, that it's necessarily Taylor that's going to leave.
Yeah, I think as well, you've got to take into consideration the fact that over the last few seasons, Kieran Tierney's had a few injury problems. So even if, he came in January and Valle left and then they lost Taylor in the summer, they would have to bring in another left back anyway. But I think, for me personally, I've heard that, and I've seen Brendan Rodgers being interviewed and saying that he really wants Taylor to stay because he likes him, and he's a great worker for the team and all the good things that he says about him. So I'm sure that he'll be trying his best to ensure that Greg Taylor stays. I've also seen reports that say that Greg Taylor himself has said that he wants to stay at Celtic, even though obviously we've seen like Dinamo Zagreb and various other teams mentioned as potential places for him to go if he leaves Celtic. It's the fact that he is now into that bit of his contract where he could tomorrow get a great offer from somewhere and he's off, not necessarily right away, but at the end of the season. So I think Celtic are going to have to be, to use a very old expression, they're going to have to call canny on how they deal with this situation, because what they don't want to happen for sure is for Valle to go because Kieran Tierney's come in and then they've not got Taylor tied up, and suddenly somebody comes in with an offer that Taylor and his people can't refuse, and then he's off in January as well, and then they've only got that one left back who, and I love Kieran Tierney as a footballer, but he has had some injury problems going forward, and they could leave themselves in a very difficult position. But let me see. No more comments. So that I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, because usually when I'm watching you guys, there's usually quite a lot of comments. So I don't know whether I should take that as a compliment for me or a fact that they're all thinking, "Who is this guy? He's a pain in the rear end. Let's turn off." But back to tonight's game. I had a comment earlier, as I said, a couple of chat groups that I'm involved with, and one of the comments that somebody put in just more or less at the end of the game was that he had seen somewhere that Unai Emery had said that next week he was going to play kids against Celtic as opposed to the first team. Personally, I don't think that's how it will play out, but if that was the situation, do you think then that Brendan Rodgers should bring in some of the fringe players for Celtic, assuming that they have got through to the next round, with it, depending on what other results are tonight and stuff like that? Do you think it would be a good opportunity for both teams to rest their top stars, Graham?
Yeah, I mean, I think Celtic are through. I was looking at the league table before I came on, and I think Man City are in that kind of just outside that top 24. They're 4 points behind Celtic, so Celtic are basically qualified, I think. So I think it is a chance for Celtic to rest a few players and give other players a chance. The last thing they wanted to do was be having to go to Villa Park to get a result, because that'll be a very difficult game. I think now, though, they can kind of relax and they can maybe play a few fringe players. It'll still be a difficult game, but I think from what I've seen, I think Celtic are through. So it is a chance to rest a few players and bring a few fringe players in.
Mikey?
I don't think they can afford to play a fully weakened side. I think maybe having a couple of the sort of fringe players playing, but I don't think they can kind of go with the second 11, because I think even the Aston Villa third 11 would probably be quite a level above that second Celtic 11. So I think that they can't overlook it, because the last thing Celtic want is to finish the group stages or the league phase on an absolute hammering. They want to try and go into the next round with a bit of momentum. So even if, for example, Celtic play a couple of their fringe players, then fair enough, because they might be able to go there and maybe not get a result, but not get sort of humiliated in a sense. But I think if they overlook the game and start playing some of their like younger players or some players that haven't played in a while, I think it can get quite ugly, and I think that does have a knock-on effect. If you're going into one of these games and you're getting beat heavily, then I think that can have really that psychological impact going into the next game that you play in the next round. So I think they need to be wary of that, but it is also an opportunity to rest a couple of players.
I was just checking there, and Celtic have secured the playoffs, so they are through. So they can do what they want against Aston Villa. They are through.
Cool. Just another wee message there for ConzoCast. If Villa go full strength, it'll be great to get anything for Celtic. If Villa play the kids, Celtic should take advantage of it and get a massive 3 points, not even to get up the table, just for the win. For me personally, I'm a great believer in always turning out your strongest team, regardless of the opposition, because you should be wanting to win everything all the time. But I get completely the point that ConzoCast is making there. However, it is, in inverted commas, a battle of Britain, for want of a better expression. And there's a certain amount of pride, isn't there, when Scottish teams play English teams, especially if they win. It's like another feather in the cap, as will happen tomorrow. Of course, there's a big game tomorrow in the Europa down in Manchester, which we will give fleeting comment to, and that was the fleeting comment there. But do you think there's ever a good reason not to play your strongest 11, even if you have qualified? Do you think you should always play the strongest team, Graham?
Not necessarily, because I think when you've got a lot of games to play and a lot of big games, I think you want to try and, if you've got a chance to rest a few players, then this is the chance to do it when you're already through. I kind of look at, for example, see some of the cup games like Scottish Cup or FA Cup. I'm never a massive fan of big teams fielding weakened teams in games like these, because it's a big chance to get through in a cup game. you know, and I think sometimes these teams do treat things a bit too lightly, and if they get knocked out, it's their own fault. But in this occasion, Celtic can do what they want because they're through, you know, and it's a good chance for, like, you bring in fringe players to the Aston Villa game, they've got a point to prove. They want to try and play. So I think it's a good thing. And Celtic have got the squad to do it. So, yeah, I think there are times where I don't mind playing weekend teams. And I think this is a good chance for them to do it now. And also, I just wonder as well, this Aston Villa game, it'll be a game of the one that got away. Because obviously all the talk was about Celtic not going for John McGinn. Maybe John McGinn might think he's got a point to prove.
But then John McGinn might not be playing because he's out, or he has been out with, I think it was a hamstring injury. Mikey, what's your thoughts?
I think that sometimes, obviously, I do understand the point of you should play your best side because then it gives you a better idea of where teams are on paper. But I think it should really just be down to what the manager thinks is best for the team because, I mean, obviously, if you look at it from a sort of linear point of view, playing your best side should get the best results. But if you're playing the best team that you've got over and over and over again, then one, the players that are maybe on the fringes don't really get that opportunity to break into the first team. But at the same time, those players are going to get tired eventually, and they're not going to perform to the same level that you'd expect or want from them. And also, what then happens if one of your starters gets injured? Then you're bringing in one of these players who hasn't played a lot of football, and that can have a much more major effect on the team as a whole. So I do see both sides, but I think that it should just be down to what the manager thinks is best for the team, because there is teams that are very much, they have a starting 11 that they're very content with. They play it in no matter what, and that does work for some teams. But I feel like if you have the opportunity and you have the facilities to be able to have a weakened side that's still going to be competitive in a game, then why not go for it? But the one thing I'm not a fan of is completely chucking out maybe a third string 11 that's not expecting to get anything out of the game. It's just to give rest to the sort of better players in the team. I'm not a fan of that, but I think if you use it to an actual tactical, if you use that as a tactical advantage to try and rest some of your better players, but also have a good team, then I have no issues with it at all.
Yeah, of course, there's all the talk about, you know, the number of games that players have to play nowadays. And of course, this new format for the Champions League has increased the number of games that they have to play. And of course, Celtic have just gone through a period there where they played a hell of a lot of games in the run up to this particular game. Do you think it might have been beneficial had the Scottish Premier League or the SPFL or the SFA decided to give Celtic, say, a week off prior to tonight?
It's a weird one because I think the whole narrative of players to play too many games, and this is more of an English issue than a Scottish issue that I've kind of gathered on. I think I don't subscribe to that a lot at all, really, with especially the bigger sides in England where they have, one, the money to be able to buy 3 starting 11s that's competitive in the Champions League, but also when you look at even a mid-table League One team down in England, they play more games than the top teams. But I think in Scotland, I think there is that issue because maybe not necessarily for a Celtic or a Rangers because, again, they have the money to be able to buy these players, but if you're taking in, for example, a Hearts or an Aberdeen or a Hibs who don't have the money to be able to go out and buy a second team that will be able to really fill in and be a similar level to that first team, I do think you can sort of make the case that the SFA can benefit them more by giving them a break. But I think for Celtic, and the main point is that it's the same situation for a lot of different clubs around Europe. A lot of teams have got a lot of fixture congestion around this time of the season, and for me personally, as a viewer, I'm a big fan of seeing a lot of games around Christmas time. I know that's a sort of selfish way to look at it, but if you're looking at it from my perspective and a lot of Scottish football fans' perspective, this time of the season's the best time of the season because there's games happening all the time. So I think from a viewing perspective, I think that a lot of people see the benefits in having Scottish games on around this time, but I can see why people would say if we're to try and benefit Scottish clubs in Europe for the coefficient and whatnot, I can definitely see the argument as to why you maybe give them a couple of weeks off. But yeah, as I said, I think you can kind of look at it from both sides.
Graham?
The SFA got teams out. That'll never happen. Certainly, I noticed there was a couple of times this season where, like, not Scotland but other nations have actually allowed their teams to have a week off to prepare for like big games and playoff games, which I think is a good thing. But it'll never happen in Scottish football because they don't care. You know, they're not interested, SFA, in helping out Scottish teams. They've never been that way. I get the point, and it would be nice if that did happen, but there's no chance. You know, Mike is right, there is, especially in England, there is a lot of games and a lot of people complaining about the amount of games they're playing. But I always find that a bit of a moot point in England because the money they get paid. Do you know what you're getting paid? Thousands of pounds, just go and play. I would quite happily play. I would quite happily play every day if I was getting paid that much money. But yeah, I mean, in Scotland there is a lot of games, and this is the reason as well why Callum McGregor has stopped playing for Scotland, because there's too many games. He wants to focus on Celtic, which I completely get. But there is absolutely no chance of the SFA helping Scottish teams out because that's not what they do.
Yeah, and if you take the Callum McGregor example there yourself, I mean, for so long he was playing constantly for Celtic, you know, playing for Scotland, continually on and on and on. And then just over the last couple of seasons, you know, he's had a wee bit of time out with injuries that he never ever was bothered with when he was a younger player. And as you said, Graham, yeah, completely understand why, you know, he's decided to retire from the international setup and concentrate on Celtic. And I think Celtic have definitely benefited because of that. But back to tonight's game. Now, I'm always a great critic of refereeing and linesmen, right? Not just in Scotland, but all over. Whenever I watch football from wherever, I can usually always find fault with the officials. But I thought the officials tonight, you know, did actually pretty well. There was a couple of times when they didn't give decisions for both teams that he probably should have, but he allowed the game to flow. Do you think the referee had a good game, Graham?
Yeah, I think it's always been the referee is not the one that's getting talked about. You know, I know we talked about the VAR decisions earlier, but I think everyone watching that can see it was right. Yeah, I thought the referee was fine tonight. You know, I like a referee that's not too fussy and just doesn't, you know, it's not all about him. And I thought tonight was very good. And I noticed as well before I came on tonight as well that, and again, something never happened in Scotland football, but I saw tonight that in Norway, they have actually voted to scrap VAR in the top divisions. They actually allowed the fans, the players and stuff to vote. Now, I think that's a good thing, but it'll never happen in Scotland. But I've always said this, and I'll keep maintaining the fact that VAR works as it did tonight. It's the officials that don't use it properly. But yeah, I thought all the officials tonight were absolutely fine and got pretty much everything right.
Mikey?
Yeah, I agree, and I think a huge complaint that I have with especially European referees is the over reliance on giving free kicks. They never let advantages go. They never let just sort of borderline fouls go. They always seem to, I guess, kill the momentum of games at times. And I think tonight that was kind of the complete opposite. There was a lot of opportunities for the referee to bring the game back, stop the game, but he let it flow. And I think that can only benefit the game as a whole. I think that when you've got a referee who's letting things go and playing advantages and just sort of being a bit more lenient, I think it benefits the game, because I think that it's been such a common occurrence in European football where there'll be any sort of, I guess, contact on a player, they'll go down and the free kick's given every single time. But I think tonight it was also, I'd say it's a testament to the players. There wasn't much sort of diving about. There wasn't a huge amount of, I guess, simulation or anything, which probably made the referee's job easier. But I do think that the overall performance of the referee, the linesman, the VAR, I think it all kind of worked very well tonight. And it does go to show that if you can use VAR correctly and you can integrate it well, then it is a benefit. And yeah, there's obviously a couple of downsides with it, with the whole not being able to celebrate a goal with the opportunity of it being offside. You're never going to fix that. But I think the overall argument of VAR not working can kind of be dispelled by games like tonight when it worked pretty perfectly.
Yeah, I think for me, I think VAR is a good thing, right? If used properly. But there are too many occasions, and not just in Scottish football. I've seen it in other leagues when I've been watching football from other places, where they're getting it wrong, because of interpretation. And let's be honest, that's what it comes down to at the end of the day. It comes down to interpretation. And for me, if the referee on field, unless it's an absolute huge glaring error, I think the referee should stick with his original decision. So if the referee tonight had been sent to VAR to look at the Dyson Maida situation and decided, no, I'm just going to stick with the yellow card, that should have been acceptable. I don't know if the other guys in the VAR room maybe said anything to the referee or not. We don't really know that. But 9 times out of 10, when the referee goes to that monitor, you kind of know that he's going to overturn the decision. I don't know if you feel, Graham, because I know you're quite passionate about VAR, if you feel that the referees are maybe losing a little bit of autonomy because of it.
Absolutely. It's one of my biggest bugbears. I think there's far too many games getting re-refereed. When VAR was brought in, we were all told it was going to get used for clear and obvious errors, but that's not what it's getting used for. I think far too many times during games, not just Scotland, but England as well, and other leagues as well, I think far too many times the guys on VAR are getting involved when they don't need to, and it's kind of slows the game down a little bit. And I think very, very rarely have I seen a referee go to the monitor and stick with his original decision. And it does feel like games are getting re-refereed, and that's not what it's there for. Like I said, tonight it worked perfectly. All the decisions were absolutely bang on the money. They got them all right. But too many times, especially in Scotland, it feels like the VAR guys are getting involved when they don't need to. And, it doesn't make for a good game because it's not letting the game flow. Mikey talked about the referee earlier, letting the game flow. Too many times in Scotland, it's stop, start, because the referees are getting told something in their ear. And you're kind of watching the game thinking, what are they checking here? There's no need for them to be checking something here. Clear and obvious is what it's meant to be used for like penalty decisions or stuff like that, or offside. But too many times it's getting used when it doesn't need to be. It is a big, big bugbear of mine. If you use it properly, the technology works. But far too often in Scotland, our referees don't use it properly. And that's always been a big issue with me.
Mikey?
I think that the overall premise of VAR is a very good one because it allows you to overturn incorrect decisions. But I think the main sort of issue I would have with it in terms of Scottish football is that you have these delays for the overall decision to not change, and the referee not even being sent over to the monitor. So you're spending 2 minutes sat there. The players aren't in the flow anymore. They've completely the game's just completely died down, and there's no reason for it. When they're spending a minute and a half checking something and nothing comes of it. I think what they should do, which I think it's a sort of minor thing, but I think it'd help the game a lot, is instead of halting the game to do the whole sort of checking, I think just let the game go on in the background while you check it. And that then allows you to, when the ball next goes out of play, if you then decide you want the referee to go over and see it, then get him to do that then, instead of keeping everyone waiting around for potentially the referee to be sent to the monitor. And I think if you're going to take that long to advise the referee to check that it's not clear and obvious enough for them to be getting sent to the VAR anyway. So I would say I think that there's a couple of things you can do to improve it, but there is also things with VAR that you're not going to be able to fix. You're not going to be able to, with VAR, you're not going to have the same feeling when a goal goes in, because you do have that sort of in the background thinking this could get disallowed, so you're not going to be celebrating in the complete way that you normally would. So there's a few things you can improve, but there's a few things that are just always going to be something that you're going to have to kind of just get on with if you're going to keep VAR within football, which the SFA is not going to get rid of, because the SFA, over the however many years I've watched football, I've never seen the SFA come out and say we are reverting something because it doesn't work. They'll be very strict to what they decide initially.
Yeah.
How many times have we seen the independent review panel or Willie Collum come out after a game or whatever on his YouTube channel and said, "Oh, that decision was wrong"? And this is where I have a real issue. Is, see if a referee on the park gets the decision wrong, fair enough, absolutely no problem with that. But see if you're still getting a decision wrong when you've got VAR there, I think that's unacceptable. You've got, I think, at least 3 folk in the VAR room plus the referee, plus the assistants on the park. How can you have that many officials and still get decisions wrong? I find that unacceptable.
Yeah, and as you said earlier, you know, it's not about overturning the guy on the field's decision. You know, he has to be stronger. You know, if he decides it's a penalty or whatever, and VAR say, right, go and check, and he goes and checks, and he still says to himself, no, I think I'm right. He's got whoever, you know, in his ear, probably telling him, you know, no, you've got to overturn your decision. And if the referee's not strong enough, then he probably will overturn his decision. That's how I view it. I might be wrong in that view, but that's certainly how I view it. I feel that the referee is the man in the middle, whether VAR's there or not. If he makes a decision, he has to stand by that decision, you know, rightly or wrongly.
See, if you look at England, for example, see how you sometimes hear the VAR audio. How creative does that sound? You've got about 4 or 5 folk in your ear to the referee saying all that kind of stuff, and then you've got like this is just a little thing, right? But I think it was last week. So Anthony Taylor, the referee in England, and you've got a guy on VAR saying tails. Why that for me? I just didn't get that. It's like that's not professional for me. But there's too many folk. There's too many folk in that VAR room, and too many folk talking at one time. All you need is one voice to say, look, you need to come and look at this or whatever. But too many folk talking. And there's been a couple of times in Scotland as well where they have released the VAR audio, and you kind of think, I think I've heard a different thing there. What I will say though, and I've said this before, I do like the Willie Collum thing on YouTube because it is transparent. You know, I quite like the fact that it is quite open. And if there's been a poor decision made, he will say it. I do like that. But they need to be better. The officials have got to be better.
Mm-hmm. Right, let's get back to tonight in the Champions League. A wee question for both of you here. Obviously, it's a new setup this season. More teams, more games, etc. Do you think that Celtic have benefited majorly because of the change to the format, Graham?
Absolutely. I genuinely think if this was normal, again, it depends who you get, but I think if this was a normal Champions League group, I don't think Celtic probably qualify. But the fact that you've got 36 teams, it gives you a massive opportunity. And Celtic have managed to get to the playoffs, deservedly so. They've been very impressive in this Champions League campaign. They obviously had the disappointment of getting hammered by Borussia Dortmund, but the home games have worked out very well for them. You know, I think they've been very impressive. And I think if you look at over the last few years of Celtic in the Champions League, they've failed miserably. I think this Champions League format, I like it. I've said it previously to the guys on the show. I really like the new format. I think it's really good. It gives teams a real chance to get through. And it definitely has benefited Celtic, I think.
Yeah. Mikey, what about you?
I mean, I don't think there's really any debate that it has benefited Celtic because they've done better than they normally would have. Obviously, I don't know the finances, but they've undoubtedly made a lot more money than they would have in a normal group campaign because they played more games, which means that by default they're going to make more money off of that. They're going to make more money by getting through to the next round, and they've got players there who they can now attract better players because they've got more chance of getting into the later rounds in Europe. So, as much as from a Scotland perspective in the SPFL, it's maybe not the best thing because it widens the gap even further between Celtic, Rangers, and the rest. But I think from a European standpoint for Scottish teams, it's hugely beneficial because you've got teams in there who, like, even for the Celtic fans, it's a positive for them as well because they're going to more grounds than they would have normally. But you're getting to see different games. You're not having to watch the same teams home and away twice. You're getting to experience different atmospheres, and I think the entire format itself is brilliant, not just from a Scotland perspective. I think just in general in the Champions League, Europa League and Conference League format is really good. There's a couple of things that they maybe can improve on, but for the first iteration of it, I'm very impressed and I'm very happy to see it, especially for such a radical change.
Right, well, we're almost at the end of our hour. Just want to mention that there is, of course, a locker room on tomorrow evening at 6 o'clock prior to the Manchester United and Rangers game. They'll also be on at 10 o'clock afterwards to look back at the game. Now, it's going to be a wee bit of a lucky bag choice for you tomorrow. I don't know if you're going to have Michael or Regan or both of them on. So I can't forewarn you on that, unfortunately. You'll just have to tune in and make sure. Just want to say a huge big thank you to both Graham and Mikey for joining me this evening and making my return to the locker room so much easier than it might have been. And hopefully we'll get to see you guys again soon. So thanks very much, and goodbye and good evening, everybody.
The Locker Room, with all the sports news you need, live